real and the objective down here. This is the imaginary subject up there. So I'll give you a good example. There's a man named Thomas Frank. Okay. Thomas Frank, about 8 years ago, wrote a book called What's the Matter with Kansas? I talked about this already. I talked about What's the Matter with Kansas. All right. Wait, did I talk about this before? No. All right. So Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas, tries to understand why it is that the state of Kansas is voting for the state of Kansas, of course, is one of the poorest states in the country. And but nevertheless, it voted for Republican presidential candidates in past for many years. And when George W. Bush was up for re-election in 2004, Kansas voted for Bush by a wide margin. Right? It wasn't even like close. Right? This was Bush versus Kerry. And it was like 66%, 34%, just a huge margin George Bush. And Thomas Frank is curious about this because Kansas is incredibly poor. So why is it that people in Kansas are voting for the very economic policies, right, that help to keep them poor? Right? That's what Thomas Frank wants to know. So he actually wrote this book called What's the Matter with Kansas? Now, what he discovered was that his hypothesis, or his conclusion, is that the Republican Party did a very good job in Kansas of exploiting explosive social issues to get conservative voters to vote. Right? So, so they would run ads about guns. They would run ads about abortion. They would run ads about gay marriage. Right? They would run all these sort of ads that tried to portray the Democratic Party as being out of touch with the value system, right, of a very conservative. Say what? Yes, right. Right. What we used to call, what used to be a key term, was the key term in politics, the family values. Right? But what happened then was that the real economic perspective of Thomas Frank, the real economic interest of those in Kansas was subverted by these explosive images. Right? So in other words, these sort of like messy cultural issues, right, about abortion, or these messy cultural issues about whether or not, right, gay relationships should be normalized on television, that kind of thing, right? These cultural issues essentially distracted Kansas voters from recognizing what their real, objective economic interests. Right? So for Frank, right, this idea of these explosive social issues that we use by the Republican Party were a case of ideology, the superstructure obscuring or distorting the appearance of the base. That make sense? Yes. Culture. Yeah, no, well, it's both. And one obvious criticism, I think, of this view of ideology is, well, the term that gets used is, and so ideology, this is how ideology works. The term that gets used is false consciousness. False consciousness refers to the idea that the consciousness of people, right, is located in the superstructure instead of in the base. Consciousness of people is located in the superstructure instead of in the base. In that sense, consciousness is false. Right? So if you think of the working poor in the United States as sort of still believing in the virtues of capitalism, the American dream, the possibilities and the potentialities of continued hard work, classical Marxists would look at this and say, false consciousness. Right? You don't see what your real economic interests are. You don't objectively understand your position in the economic market. Right? And so, in that sense, right, Marx then is open to the criticism, or this classical Marxist view is open to the criticism that it assumes people are very dumb. Right? Now, there are a couple of ways to respond to that criticism. One is to say, well, people are very dumb. Right? But another way to respond to that criticism is to say that no one is outside. Right? So it's not like there's a mistake in assuming, let's say, that those who are in control of society, right, those who are running it, are somehow non-ideological, or outside of ideology, or even consciously using ideology, because their view of themselves is similarly located in the same superstructure. Right? So the people in charge are just as, right, their subjectivity is just as determined by the images in the superstructure as is the people of those at the bottom. Right? In other words, if you are a believer in the virtues of capitalism, you run a large corporation, and you believe that the virtues of capitalism is what allow you, right, to run this large corporation, well then you are also a victim of false consciousness. Right? Everyone falls prey to it. And it's because the system is, you might say, unconsciously. One way to think about it is think about something like a term like exploitation. So let me give you an example. When I was at the University of Texas, I told the story already about being at the University of Texas and talking with the Texas Content Athletic Director. So I was at the University of Texas in February, and I was there for a conference on sports. And one of the little sort of sessions that the conference organizers had set up for us was a conversation between one of the people who works in their journalism department at Texas and the Texas Women's Athletic Director. The University of Texas has two athletic directors, one for men's sports and one for women's sports. So we were talking with the women's athletic director. His name is Chris Plonsky. And here's the thing, if you've ever been to a conference, you know what I'm getting at, but it was a 5 o'clock Friday session. Right? 5 o'clock Friday sessions are very poorly attended because by 5 o'clock on Friday, conference participants are drinking. Right? But I was waiting to meet up with some other people at about 7 for dinner, and so I was like, hey, what the hell, I'm going to go to this session here at Texas speak. I was there with a couple of other my friends who teach at various universities, and the conversation was just about how Texas runs things, right? The organizational routines of the University of Texas athletic program. And then the conversation sort of turned to politics inside the Big 12, right? Texas's relationship with the other members of Big 12, which used to include Texas A&M. And she was like, you know what? I'm really disappointed that Texas A&M just left the Big 12 and went to the SEC. We thought of Texas A&M as family, and I guess they didn't see us as family, and she was expressing all this sort of regret. Well, the reason that Texas A&M left the SEC or left the Big 12 to go to the ACC is because the University of Texas landed a big contract with ESPN to broadcast all their sports called the Longhorn Network, and then Texas refused to share the money with the rest of the conference. There's Texas going, we're a big happy family, right? No, don't leave us. And Texas A&M going, oh yeah, we're a family. Where's our cut of your ESPN profits, right? And so that got a little interesting there. And then she, on her own, brought up the idea of pay for play, the question of whether or not college athletes ought to be paid. Right? And so she's like, I'm against pay for play, and there are a variety of reasons, and I know the NCAA is not a great institution, but we need to enforce that, blah, blah. And we were a little surprised, me and the two friends I was seeing, we were surprised that she would bring up the question of pay for play, because it seems to me that that's the kind of line of reasoning, line of questioning she wants to avoid. But she thought she was in a room full of aspiring journalists when she assumed that it's a communication conference. She wasn't in a room full of aspiring journalists. She was in a room full of cultural critics, right? And we are not the same thing. We try to sort of poke holes in things instead of telling stories. We tear the stories apart, right? And so a pal of mine who teaches at NC Charlotte, he looks at me and he goes, "Did you just say that?" And he raises his hand, right? And his question is, what's your response to the idea that college athletes aren't in fact amateurs, that they fit into a broad economic system, and that maybe, right, they should be compensated for their labor, right? She got instantly irate, right? I mean, you could see like her blood was boiling, her face turned red, and she started yelling, right? Because she heard something like this before, right? And the whole idea just, I don't know, really grinds her ears or something, right? And what she said was incredibly revealing. What she said was when I go out onto those softball fields, right, those ladies don't see themselves as laborers. When I go to the basketball games. Right? These kids love playing basketball. They've been doing it their whole life. They don't see themselves as a labor, right? And we just kind of looked at each other and went, oh my God. Like, if you want to write the perfect thing that I've got this prefabricated critique for, that's what you would have wrote, right? All she said was ideology works, right? That's a way that we translated what she said, right? These athletes don't see themselves as labor. They don't see themselves as being exploited. And our response to this was, yeah, because that's how ideology works. Of course they don't see themselves as being exploited because you have effectively, right, given them an image of themselves in culture that obscures their economic relation to you, right? Well, yeah, but it's not nearly close enough to what they're worth. That's the problem, right? It is true that they get compensated, but they're not being compensated relative to their contribution. But he wasn't when he was in Texas, and he was making money for Texas. Why is it that some forms of labor can be compensated fairly and other forms of labor can't? Why do we have arcane laws that tell college athletes they can't participate in labor? That's the question. Well, but if that's what they're worth to the institution, why not? That's the thing, right? I mean, we could go back and forth on this forever. I mean, in fact, we basically spent entire class on this. Yeah, but the point is that her response was not, they already receive a particular form of compensation. Her response was not, no, it's just wrong, they are amateurs, and here's why. No, her response was, that's not how the athletes see themselves. Right, and keep in mind, right, it comes from both sides, right? We're talking about both ends of the hierarchy. She doesn't see them as exploited labor. They don't see themselves as exploited. And there's the Marxist critic going, no. Did you see it? You've got false consciousness. You're being exploited. Right? And that's how ideology works, right? Ideology represents a particular image, right? So we have a cultural image of the college athlete as amateur, right? Even though everything about college athletics is professionalized except labor, right? I mean, everything else in college athletics is utterly professionalized. Big TV contracts, right? Big, professionals who work with the university to bring in donors, right? You've got lawyers who run the whole NCAA, right? The NCAA is made up of lawyers. Right? The whole thing is professionalized. The only thing about the NCAA that's not professionalized is whether or not the players are paid. That's it. The entire other thing is a gigantic for-profit economic structure. Right? Yeah. Well, no. No. I mean, okay, here's the thing. Right? What you would do is you would come up with a scheme that would determine which players get compensated and which don't. Right? You're making this, right? The fallacy that you're appealing to there is the slippery slope fallacy, which is once you do X, you have to do Y and Z. Right? But you can do X and not do Y and Z. Right? I mean, just come up with a rule for it. And we've got a rule now, right, that works in one direction, and just because you change that rule doesn't mean that you have to do everything in the opposite. Right, I mean, you can come up with a scheme that gives all players a stipend, that equals stipend. You can come up with a scheme that creates a pure labor market in which college athletes are in fact bidding, right, or universities are bidding for the services of college athletes through contracts, right? Or you could just say, you know what? It doesn't make any sense to have college athletics, right? Why does the university have athletics anyway? Anybody know? You know, in Europe, in Asia, all over the world, except for the United States, right? The entire world has college-age people doing athletics and universities, and they are not associated. Right? In fact, the rest of the world has thriving professional sports. Right? There is pro soccer in Europe is bigger than the NFL in the United States. There are no college soccer teams. And so the idea that somehow the sport needs it to survive doesn't make any sense. Yes. Right. My point is that college athletes fit into, right, the economic structure of sport. But the way in which they fit into just the athletes, the way in which they fit into the economic structure of sport is as unpaid labor. Right? Unpaid labor. And so, The idea is that ideology works by presenting a cultural image around the notion of amateur. And that cultural image around the notion of amateurism is reinforced in a variety of ways. It's reinforced through the values of amateurism when you're playing amateur sports as a kid. It's reinforced in gym class at school. It's reinforced in movies, on television, on the radio, right? This whole idea of amateurism, right? And this sort of mythological idea associated with the notion of amateurism is, in fact, that very thing that exists in the superstructure that conceals, distorts, or misrepresents what's occurring in the base. Right? I'm just presenting this whole business about sport as an illustration of this classical Marxist idea of ideology. Does that make sense? Right? So when she said, when Chris Ponsky, the Texas athletic director, said, these athletes don't see themselves as labor, right? The critical translation for that is these athletes have successfully been subjectified by our ideology. Yeah, but it was an answer that she deeply believed. And that's sort of the secondary point here that I'm trying to make. Is that it's not as if just the bottom is fooled and the top is doing the fooling. Everyone's fooled. Right? The top is fooled too. The top believes, right? When she said they don't see themselves as labor, and I don't see them as labor, she believed it. Right? She wasn't like, I'm gonna say this in order to trick them. She believed it. Right? So everyone is implicated